Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to CARIFESTAXV 15. We're here live in beautiful Barbados, where we will be speaking today about Glow Up, branding beyond borders. Are you guys excited for this afternoon's activities? Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tennille Clark, and I am so thrilled to be alongside an esteemed all-female panel, and we are going to be speaking about branding beyond borders. You know, the Caribbean region is known for its authenticity and for its energy and for its effortlessness. And today we have a panel that knows a lot about branding, knows a lot about Caribbean identities, about the Caribbean aesthetic, and we can't wait to get into these presentations. You know, we're calling on the palette of Dion's vision and bravado and the visual and sonic weight of Mika's narratives. We're also calling on the speculative ambition of Shina's tech dreams and the quiet power in how Ronelli crafts heritage, legacy, and identity through fashion with a view to internationalization. And today we'll be moving through vignettes of voice, visuals, and memory. Each speaker not just talking, but presenting their identity as a living, moving, breathing brand, a moving archive, a world-building exercise. And at this time, I have the great privilege of presenting, firstly, Ms. Mika Cooper-Edwards. And just to give you a little background information on Mika's professional acumen, Mika is the founder and CEO of tech media company Soleil Space Inc., with a vision to unite and empower the world's diverse diasporas through the connective and enlightening power of media. Prior to Soleil Space, Mika established a 15-year multinational marketing career, leading international growth of iconic global brands, including Nike, Jordan, PepsiCo, Diageo, and Moet Hennessy. And after completing her master's degree in media and communications at the London School of Economics, Mika was the impact producer and head of marketing and strategic partnerships for Emmy award-winning film production studio Creative Chaos VMG, where she led festival marketing, corporate partnerships, and impact campaigns for the critically featured documentaries This Changes Everything on Netflix and Bleed Out on HBO. And she is a proud daughter of Trinidad and Tobago. She's an alumna of Howard University and the London School of Economics. And Mika was recently named to the Forbes Next 1000, which is an esteemed list of upstart entrepreneurs redefining the American dream. So join me in a hearty round of applause as we welcome Mika. To Mika's left, we have Dion Batiste Clark. Dion is an award-winning journalist and the visionary founder of Your Caribbean Guide, one of my favorite platforms coming out of the Caribbean region. It's a digital platform dedicated to the documentation and authentic retelling of Caribbean stories and experiences, and also reimagination as well. Dion is a staunch advocate for Caribbean storytelling. She's journeyed across the islands, uncovering narratives that stretch far beyond the sand and sea. Her work is driven by a belief that history lives not just in textbooks, but in the lived experiences of everyday people, the guardians of folklore, the artists of our streets, and the keepers of our collective memory. And whether you see Dion on air, or she's behind the lens, or she's in a book, or she's guiding the career of her brilliant daughter, Dion continues to elevate Caribbean voices with purpose, passion, and pride, reminding us all that our stories matter and must be told by us for us. So join me in welcoming Mrs. Dion Batiste Clark. To Dion's left, we have Ronelli Ricania. Ronelli is the founder and the designer behind Ziva Sarai Limited. It's a Belizean fashion brand celebrated for its bespoke bridal and event gowns. And with roots in science and service, holding a biology degree and formerly serving as a meteorological officer, she courageously shifted her path to follow her true passion, fashion as art, culture, and empowerment. Beyond design, she is deeply committed to advocacy. She co-founded Naimi Belize, international network of women in business that serves on the boards of cultural and youth organizations. And she also uses fashion as a platform to celebrate heritage, empower women, and inspire change. And for her, fashion is more than just aesthetics. It is storytelling, identity, and transformation. And through her organization, she continues to weave beauty with purpose, shaping both garments and legacies. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Ronelli Recania. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Shaina Silva. Shaina is an award-winning entrepreneur, ecosystem architect, and digital innovation strategist committed to unlocking economic growth in emerging markets. Her work spans Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, where she has built innovation ecosystems and led transformative programs at the intersection of entrepreneurship, technology, and sustainable development. Shaina is a graduate of Babson College, and she's also an alumna of Draper University, where she deepened her expressions and her expertise in entrepreneurship and exponential technologies. She has been named to many lists. She is a fellow alumna of the MyPad most 100 most influential people of African descent, which is in line with the UN's International Decade of People of African Descent. She's also a recipient of the Institute of Caribbean Studies 30 Under 30 Emerging Leaders Award. She is also the Nan Langowitz Women Who Make a Difference awardee and the Shelby Carlton Davis Entrepreneurship Prize. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Shaina Silva. And at this time, I welcome to the stage my friend Mika so that she can provide us with a riveting perspective on the anatomy of a strong Caribbean brand.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, first of all. Applause for the audience. Thank you for coming. All right. So our panel is about branding beyond borders. And this was a collective group effort where we felt, what does our region need? How do we need to tackle this topic? And to open with, we felt like it was really important to define the anatomy of a strong brand, and specifically a strong Caribbean brand. So this is a little bit universal, but I'm using examples both from outside the region and inside the region to illustrate. But let's start with what we learned in school. So if I have any marketing people in here that studied business or anything in school, you might remember the 4 P's of marketing, right? Let's just throw that out the window. Basically, this is not irrelevant, but it is impractical for building brands for the future. And the reason for that is because we're in a much more digitized environment that is very dynamic, that's constantly changing. And so what it does, it brings us to where we have been, which is the sun, sea, sand. And I would say of late, our brand has been mostly about carnival. This is what we've done well, but now other regions are doing it better than we are. They're doing it with more innovation. They're doing it with stronger customer touch. And they're also doing it with better marketing and positioning of their brands. So Carnival is what we've brought forward to be our brand. But, you know, when we really look at it, we've been exporting Carnival so aggressively that how differentiated is our Carnival anymore around the world? And so what we're looking at is that we're really at risk of losing that as our identity from a global branding perspective. So this is where we've been. But you know that saying, what brought us here will necessarily get us there. And so the question becomes, what does the future Caribbean brand look like? What is the Caribbean brand of the future? So it's important to really make that distinction between a good brand and a strong Caribbean brand. Good is they come, they like us, they play on the beach, they go back, and then they're on to what's the next destination, right? a strong brand is defined by a few factors. And instead of the static look at the 4 Ps, it's really a continuum along a few dimensions. So the first dimension is real versus authentic. So the authentic really should be on the other side. Sorry about that. That's a Birkin bag, one of the highest end fashion accessories, Sex and the City made it popular, etc., etc. But it's symbolic of an era when real was everything, right? Everything was about, do you have the real thing and keeping it real. I would argue that we're now in the fake it till you make it era, accentuated by AI and different other things. So in that fake it till you make it era, where fake is acceptable, where people are boldly doing fake things and promoting and feeling proud that they're doing the fake things, right? Fake body parts, fake everything, right? So what really does stand out is authenticity. And so when you look at a brand like an Oprah Winfrey, she's built on authenticity, trust. She's able to extract really deep insights from her audiences because of trust. And for that, she's been able to transition from just being a talk show host to being this global media powerhouse and a symbol that could transcend any field. One of her most iconic interviews of recent was with with Prince Harry and Meghan, right? So, that brings me to my next dimension. Consistent versus sustainable. So on the left is the British royal family. I know I'm in Barbados, but I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of the British royal family, right? What they've done well is they've been consistent. They've been around forever. You could always count on a royal wedding to create some buzz, and they go away, and you see Buckingham Palace, etc., etc. But the question of sustainability, there are 3 important things that now communities are asking. Who built this? Who was it built for? And who does it benefit? Who benefits from it? And that is what is showing now the cracks in the brand of the British royal family. So consistency is not enough. And then we move to sustainability. So here is where sustainability is about benefiting everyone, benefiting communities. And a lot of times we confuse sustainability with environmental stuff. But that example of Lego, which is very hard to recycle Lego toys, they have created a campaign where you can recycle your Legos by giving it to kids and giving it to communities so that there's use beyond its lifetime. So who benefits, right, is broader than just the people who made it. Loud versus disruptive. Another misconception about branding is that the people that brand the best are the loudest. You have to make a splash, and you have to make noise, and you have to get people's attention. Yes, we are in an attention economy. But if you look at that picture of Times Square, if anyone has been in Times Square, it's basically sensory overload. And that is really a microcosm of what the branding landscape is right now. What do you pay attention to, right? And so that nuance between being loud and being disruptive, going to the right, is a great example of what true disruption is. So this year is the 20th anniversary of the Dove Real Beauty campaign. This was really to take what has been a systemic problem and change the whole entire notion of beauty, right? And they're still celebrating that 20 years later and have been very successful. So disruption is about meaningful change. And then creative versus innovative. What's the difference? I think this is really important for the Caribbean because we pride ourselves in being creative people. We're so creative, yes, we are so creative. But this is an example of what creativity, what the danger of falling into or resting on creativity does. This is a painting by a guy called Mark Rothko. The name of it is Orange, Red, and Yellow. Guess how much it auctioned for? $87 million. So that's a good example of how subjective creativity is, of how fleeting it can be, and how it's so arbitrary. But innovation is when you apply creativity and you translate it into solving problems and moving society forward in a meaningful way, right? So the iPhone is a perfect example of that. It solved problems. It is still solving a problem for us, hence why it's not that easy for people to copy, right? Assembler versus unifier. So during COVID, I don't know if anybody was online when there was the Versus concert. I was a big fan of those. And this particular one was Beanie Man versus Bounty Killer. You couldn't get better than that for me, right? Honestly, at that point in time, you might have thought that the Versus concerts, which were online battles, for those who aren't familiar, online battles between iconic artists within different genres, right? And people went crazy, right? But it didn't last. Once COVID was over, Versus died down. They actually sold it to Elon Musk and Twitter, so that's a whole other conversation. But that's an example of assembling people. But unifying people is something different. And I chose to use an example of Harley Davidson and the community of riders that they've created. Not my culture. I'll argue to say, I don't think I'll share the belief system of many Harley Davidson bikers. But I've been to a conference that Harley Davidson had, and I felt like I was in a completely different world where there was such a unity and a shared belief system that they actually see themselves as a gang, as a global gang around this one brand. And so what's the proof in the pudding? Bringing it home. A strong brand really goes from connection to identity. It's enough to connect, that's great, for a moment in time. Forever 21, they were a brand that appealed to teenagers, right? And they were very, very successful for a period of time because they tapped into a zeitgeist in a moment. But when you look at a brand like Brand Jordan, where it was an athlete who no longer plays on the court, but for people to incorporate his values and his excellence into their own identity, to the fact that they would put tattoos on their back, right, to symbolize that they are part of this Jordan identity. That's a nuanced difference, and that is the proof of a strong brand. And so really, ultimately, as a strong Caribbean brand, we want to move from people coming to our shores and seeing us as a mere transaction. We want to move from being the Pepsis of the world who think they could take Kylie Jenner and hop onto a Black Lives Matter campaign and be the real Black Lives Matter type of movement. What is the Caribbean movement? What is it that we are sparking for the rest of the world that is going to bring us forward and that's going to sustain us? So those are just a few of the examples. But what we decided to do for you guys is to really zone into what we think can be our Caribbean strengths, right? So my fellow panelists are going to introduce that for you now, starting with Dion.
Pleasant good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Mika, for setting the stage for this discourse. We meet, oh, yes. We meet at a time when borders, physical, political, and cultural, are both dissolving and hardening. On one hand, technology has made it possible for us to share work with audiences in every corner of the globe within seconds. But on the other, crises such as economic instability, climate change, pandemics, and the persistent weight of neo-imperialist influence continue to challenge our ability to survive, adapt, and thrive. In this environment, branding beyond borders is not just a marketing strategy. It is an act of survival and self-definition. Branding beyond borders begins when we own our story and tell it on our own terms. As Caribbean creators and innovators, we are not only selling products and services, we are exporting identity, values, and a way of seeing the world. And when done with authenticity, branding becomes not just a business tool, but it becomes also a cultural lifeline. For the Caribbean, branding beyond borders is not a luxury. It's an act of innovation, and as I said before, it's an act of survival. But what exactly does it mean? Branding beyond borders is selling truth, not stereotypes. For too long, we've allowed the Caribbean to be packaged and sold through someone else's lens. A land of sun, sea, and sand, good only for vacations and escape. But that is not our whole truth. When we brand ourselves beyond borders, we must sell the real Caribbean, one that is complex, innovative, and unstoppable. We need to always remember that truth sells because it resonates. Stereotypes expire over time because, of course, they are hollow. If we want to really glow up as a region, our branding must stop feeding the postcard and start amplifying the heartbeat. But again, what does that mean? It means that truth is authentic, complex, and contextual, while stereotypes are flat, it's repetitive, and they're reductive. We allow our truth to become stereotypes through oversimplification, commercial exploitation, and through repetition without context. And when we lose or we give up control of the narrative, that is how we lose sight of who we are. A truth is a piece of reality. It becomes a stereotype when it's presented as the whole story. The Caribbean brand, as mentioned before, is a story of survival after centuries of forced migration, exploitation, and reinvention. It is the rhythm of calypso that speaks truth to power. It is the boldness of carnival, where color and movement help to rewrite the narrative of oppression into one of joy and one of liberation. It is the entrepreneurial hustle of our street vendors, the lyrical wit of our poets, and the ingenuity of our artisans and inventors. The COVID-19 pandemic helped to expose our vulnerabilities, but it also showcased our adaptability. With closed borders and canceled festivals, we were forced to pivot. We learned through the pandemic that creativity does not pause for crisis. In fact, it helps us to sharpen our creative edge. The challenge, however, is to ensure that the systems and platforms we build during these difficult times remain part of our long-term strategy for continued global reach. Caribbean creativity is not a hobby. It is an economic engine. The steel pan, which was born out of discarded oil drums, now played in orchestras around the world. Reggae, which was born on the streets of Kingston, reshaped global music, and we have fashion designers from our islands who are influencing catwalks in Paris and New York. This is not luck. This is innovation, and it is time we value it as such. That means treating creativity not as a side hustle, but as a serious industry with measurable impact, capable of creating jobs and attracting investment and fueling sustainable growth. In a world that's often dominated by multinational brands and global monopolies, Caribbean nationals need to resist being flattened into stereotypes. When we tell our own stories, we push back against the one-dimensional Caribbean often sold to the world. Branding beyond borders, we need to remember, is not just about selling more. It's about selling true. It is about infusing every product, every service, every performance with our cultural DNA so that no matter where it lands, it carries the unmistakable imprint of our region. In doing so, we would open the doors to renewal, economic renewal through creative exports, cultural renewal through preservation of tradition, and personal renewal as our work gains recognition and respect. But we have to, of course, create infrastructure for the glow up, because no brand glows on passion alone. Caribbean governments, private sector leaders, and diaspora networks must treat our creators, inventors, and innovators as an economic priority. This means investing in training, marketing, and technology, giving access to funding for export-ready projects, intellectual property protection to guard against exploitation, and also strategic partnerships that open distribution channels and new markets. Valuing means investing. A strong Caribbean brand needs the infrastructure. So just as we build ports for trade, we must build platforms for creative export. Valuing also means preserving. So we have to protect our intellectual property, document our traditions, and ensure that future generations inherit the craft and the confidence to build on it. If we fail to invest and preserve, we risk losing not just our cultural products, but the very innovations that help to make us who we are. Branding beyond borders, as I prepare to close, is more than selling products overseas. It is about asserting that our creativity has no boundaries. It's about declaring that our art, our music, our fashion and film and design are not niche curiosities, but global commodities with cultural weight and economic value. When the world tries to reduce us to a postcard, we respond with a full-length feature film. When algorithms bury our voices, we need to amplify them through our own networks. When crisis threatens to dim our light, we need to find new ways to glow. The Caribbean glow up is not a future dream. It's happening right now. Every time we innovate through struggle, every time we choose authenticity over stereotype, and every time our story crosses borders, we are glowing beyond limits. So let us commit today to nurturing brands that travel, stories that resonate, and creativity that refuses to be contained by borders. Because while our islands may be small, our vision, our talent, and our glow are limitless. Thank you.
So I'll start off with sharing a bit of rhythm that comes from my country. Of course, I gotta represent. Walking alone by the roadside, covered in dust, cars speeding by. Nobody stop, nobody slow down. Everybody in a hurry to move along. Martina. Beautiful, wasn't it? So that song, what you just heard were the drums of the Garifuna. That song was born in Belize by the legendary Andy Palacio, reimagined by the voices of Calypso Rose, Santana, and our Belize's Garifuna Collective. That is what you call the power of Caribbean branding as a unifier. It tells our stories in ways that no borders can contain. I live in Belize. Have you heard of Belize before? It is in a very unique position. Geographically, we're in the Caribbean, we're in Central America, but the Caribbean Sea runs in our veins. I grew up in a mestizo household where Spanish traditions, the mestizo culture, was very dominant. But guess what? We all speak Creole, which sounds a lot like the patois. And our broke-down music, the rhythm, sounds a lot like calypso and a lot like the reggae. The Garifuna drums always pulls us back to our Caribbean and our indigenous roots. The Caribbean identity, that is impossible to ignore. In the rice and beans, the broke-down, the carnival, you can feel the heartbeat of the Caribbean region, living and alive. When we talk about unity, it's often sounds abstract. And the truth is, We live it every day. We feel it in melodies we recognize from other islands. We hear it from proverbs and folklore that sounds a lot like stories our grandparents told us. And we eat it. We taste it. From the rice and beans from Belize, the roti from Trinidad, and the patés from Jamaica. The food is our universal passport. These are not just small things. These are cultural touchstones that remind us that we can be many islands, many nations, but one Caribbean. But the challenge is, are we really owning our Caribbeanness, or are we allowing the world to define it for us? Oftentimes, and far too long, the Caribbean has been branded by outsiders as just a destination. Beautiful, yes, but very incomplete. We are more than that. We're creators, we're innovators, we're entrepreneurs. But let me pause, because this one part is very important. The Caribbean does not need external validation for us to know our worth. So I repeat it again. The Caribbean does not need external validation for us to know our worth. We don't need a stamp of approval from the world for our identity. Our unity, our brand, our cultural legacy is for us first. When we as a region embrace it, share it, and live it, the world will follow. Caribbean branding as a unifier is about building from within. When we stand together, amplify our voices, we connect across borders, we become stronger. And when we define ourselves regionally, we ensure that no outside force shrink us down to just sun, sea, and sand. This is why our artists, our storytellers, our chefs, our creatives, our musicians are so critical. These are our cultural ambassadors. They don't just entertain us, they remind us of who we are. They reimagine our traditions in modern days and pass it on with pride to our next generations. When a Belizean artist collabs with a Jamaican artist, and when a Guyanese inspires a Barbadian filmmaker, and a Trinidadian fashion designer influencing fashion, that is branding in motion. This is how unity becomes visible, audible, and tangible. Through their work, they speak language that we all understand, the language of creativity. So let me leave you with this. Caribbean branding as a unifier is not about erasing our differences. It's about weaving them into a tapestry that the whole world can admire, starting with us. We can tell our stories through art, through food, our products, and our voices. Because a basket is just not a basket. A carnival costume is just not feathers. They are legacies. They are resilient, and they are unity. The Caribbean is just not a place you visit. It is people. It is a spirit. It is a movement. So may I ask you, if you could describe the Caribbean with one word, what would it be? Just one word. Great. And that mix of words, colors, and rhythm and feeling, that is our branding alive. It is unstoppable and it is resilient. Let's own it, let's live it, and let's unite the world with it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just in case I need my notes. I thought you were gonna. Not sure how to do this. Or maybe I should take my shoes off.
If you're taking the shoes off, leave it with me, okay?
Yes, this is perfect. All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here. This is my first CARIFESTA, and I'm so grateful to the organizers for inviting me and for being part of a panel with such incredible, accomplished women, all women. Can we please give a round of applause? So today I'm gonna touch on the disruptor side of the Caribbean brand, and it's gonna be a little bit more unconventional from what you've just heard, because I come from a technology and innovation perspective. So I may not talk as much about the depths of our culture, but I will touch on what would make us proudly a disruptive Caribbean brand. So when you think about the word disruption, normally speaking, it has a negative connotation, right? The dictionary describes disruption as a noun, and the word means a disturbance or interruption that causes disorder or confusion in a system, a process, or a routine. Okay, that's not a great feeling. But in the world of technology, which is the world that I live in, disruption has a very different meaning. In this context, it's not about chaos, it's about possibility. In this context, it's about big ideas. It's about new models and new ways of doing things. It's about thinking boldly and stepping outside of our comfort zones. It's about defying the status quo. And we love to defy the status quo. When we talk about disruption in the context of innovation, there are some key ingredients that come with it. First, it usually starts very small. When something is disruptive, you don't always see it coming. And it's usually something that starts in a market that nobody is really looking at. The big players are not paying attention to it. Second, it's something that can grow. And it might start growing very slow, and then suddenly it takes off. And then when it grows and takes off, typically that takeoff moment is when it starts to transform things and really start becoming disruptive. And then the third, after it has disrupted, it now changes the status quo. We start to giving new definitions to how we understand the thing that it disrupted. Completely new definitions. I'm gonna give an example of disruptive innovation that comes from the tech world, one that you all might know. Please raise your hand if you like to Netflix and chill. Netflix is thank you, 2 people. All of you, is there a Caribbean version of Netflix? Yes, there should be one. Soleil Space! Upcoming. So Netflix, a brand that was launched around the 1990s by a couple of founders, wanted to change the way that people were viewing films. At the time, Blockbuster was the leader. How many people remember Blockbuster? If you are less than 10 years old, you probably have never heard of Blockbuster. But Netflix had an idea. The Netflix founders had an idea to change the way that people were going into stores, Blockbuster stores, to select their films, to rent it, and then to come back and return it. They had an idea to do it as a mail service. Order your film, we'll send it to you by mail, and then you can return it to us by mail. So you never leave the comfort of your home. So they went to Blockbuster and they said, we'd love to partner with you on this idea. And Blockbuster said, I don't think so. This is catastrophic ideation right here. We don't want any of it. People love the experience of going inside a store. It's a Friday night activity with families who have kids. And Netflix said, yes, but maybe that's limiting. Maybe we need to think about another experience. That can't be the only experience. And Blockbuster said, I don't think anyone wants another experience. Well, as you can imagine, for those of you who know that Blockbuster no longer exists, Netflix did what they believed would be something fresh, something new, and something that people needed. It also started looking at how to make DVD rental more accessible to more people, because when you go into a store and you rent one DVD, that means hundreds of other people can't rent that one DVD, right? So it started asking questions like, how can we make one DVD accessible to multiple people? All right? So, fast forward in 2025, do we Netflix and chill, or do we Blockbuster and chill? Netflix and chill. So Blockbuster got disrupted by Netflix. It didn't see it coming. It didn't think it was relevant. It didn't think it was useful. It didn't even think that people would want it. Why? Because they were set in one way of thinking, one way of doing, and one way of innovating. So our Caribbean culture has also been very disruptive from the get-go. We were born out of disruption. It is actually part of our DNA, right? If you look at this image here, this is actually taking us back beyond the slave trade to the times of the Taino and the Arawak and the Caribs, right? When we had colonizers come into our region and start putting a stake on the ground and calling it their own. But a lot of these indigenous communities said that they would not stand for that. And so they started to create an uproar around it, which ultimately led to them creating maroon communities. Now, when the African slaves arrived, a few centuries later, they started to mix with these indigenous communities, the few that were left, and started to grow the concept of maroon communities, which meant that these people broke away from a slave system that existed, hid in the mountains and in caves, and created entire new communities and societies that were separate from the slave system that was going on the plantations, that their masters may or may not have known was going on, right? So these maroons, they disrupted slavery itself by creating an entire secret society living in places that they could never be found. Now, maroons were the first sparks of disruption in the region at that time, which was a precedent, and I want to emphasize a precedent, that set the stage for an even greater disruption that would follow. This image that I'm sharing here is a voodoo ceremony. How many of you understand or know Haitian history? Proud Haitian in the house. So this voodoo ceremony, at least depicted by this artist, took place in a sacred space called Bois Caïman. And this voodoo ceremony, which was held by maroons at the time, is said to be, alleged, because I wasn't there, so I cannot claim to absolutely know that that's what it was, but is allegedly said to be the spark that allowed the Haitian Revolution to take place. So these maroons, despite living in their separate communities and having disrupted from the system of slavery, continued to think amongst themselves how they could create greater disruption and not only live separately from the slave system, but to continue to completely take over the islands and create an entire new system that they would be ruling. Fast forward, that precedent, that gathering of the maroons at Bois Caïman, the fact that they broke away from one thing and created another, sparked the Haitian Revolution. If Maroons were the first spark of that disruption, the Haitian Revolution was the wildfire. What began as local resistance ultimately became the world's first successful slave-red revolution. Now, the Haitian Revolution did not only stop there. Haiti became the first successful slave-led revolution. But in doing that, created a brand for itself as a symbol of freedom across the Caribbean and the Afro-descendant world. Am I right? We don't have enough Haitians in this house. But I do want you Caribbeans to also, of all different islands, to recognize the place that Haitian history plays not only for Haiti, but for the Caribbean region and for the African diaspora as a whole. And so Haiti emerged as the first free Black republic, dismantling one of the wealthiest colonial economies of its era, and proving that oppression could not only be resisted, but defeated. And at the time, Haiti disrupted 3 world superpowers: France, Spain, and the United States. Disruption always has precedence. And I've said this before when I showed you Netflix and Blockbuster. I shared the journey of Netflix starting out as on-demand DVD rental, ultimately going into streaming. I shared the example of the Haitian Revolution and how it started from the Taino communities, the Maroons, and ultimately the independent nation that you've come to know. Every era of disruption rests on a foundation of earlier struggles. And so it begins as resistance, it evolves into a revolution, and then it eventually becomes transformation. Now, what makes a brand disruptive? A disruptive brand isn't just about clever marketing. It's not just about differentiating yourself in the market as something bigger, better, grander than the other brands in the market. It's about challenging the way that things have always been and making products or services more accessible, more inclusive, and building a deep emotional connection with people. These are examples of some modern-day disruptors. People of Caribbean descent who have made their marks on the world because they have disrupted the status quo. They represent the norm for disruption. But before they represented the norm for disruption, they represented outcasts, outliers, people who were misunderstood, people who were looked at as less than. Examples are Kamala Harris, combination of Caribbean and South Asian ancestry, first Black female vice president of the United States ever. Naomi Osaka, superstar tennis champion, who has also become an advocate for mental health and vocally advocating for mental health, not privately, but vocally. She has disrupted the landscape and made it possible for other athletes who suffered quietly to now step forward and share more about the mental health landscape when it comes to sports. We have Rihanna, another symbol of disruption, who started out as a Bayesian pop star in the music space, and then using her own personality, her own understanding, and her own know-how, started a beauty brand that would allow more Black women of all shades to now be included in the beauty space. Because major beauty brands before Rihanna only had a select few shades for women of color. And Rihanna has expanded that palette to put Black, medium brown, high brown, yellow brown, deep yellow, and all the shades in between. Disrupted the beauty landscape. Rihanna also disrupted the lingerie landscape. Victoria's Secret and several other brands who had been there before had a hold on the market. They were the only ones that we knew of. But then comes Rihanna with Savage Fenty. And she says that all women, whatever your shape, your size, whether you are a C cup, an A cup, a triple D, you should have beautiful, sexy lingerie. And she disrupted that landscape, taking a massive amount of market share from Victoria's Secret. Partnered with Amazon Prime to host the first ever live Savage Fenty show on Amazon Prime, taking over Victoria's Secret space in the market. Now, there are many others, but I will stop there. Disruptive innovation matters for the Caribbean's future. Why? I'm sure by now you can guess why it matters, right? We cannot remain how we are. We have to keep bubbling, thinking, innovating, but not in the way of making micro improvements, right? We don't want to do something a little bit better. We want to do it disruptively better. And so why it matters, I'm going to give 6 reasons. Well, I've listed 6 reasons, but I'm only going to share 3 for the sake of time. The first, narrative depth. We need to go beyond sun, sand, and sea. We've heard it mentioned so many times. The Caribbean cannot only be known for that. And we certainly cannot only be known for our carnivals or our calypso music. We need to be able to give narrative depth to what the Caribbean brand represents. Second, economic sovereignty. So not just being consumers of the things that are being imported in our islands, but to being creators that the world is consuming from us. Not just in music, but in technology, in education, and in spaces where most people are not thinking about innovating and disrupting. And then the third, leapfrogging constraints. As we all know, many of our islands suffer from infrastructure gaps, fragility, environmental degradation. And so we need to think about disruptive branding, disruptive innovation, in the sense that we can use technology to bypass a lot of the infrastructure that didn't exist before. And an example of that is that in the Caribbean, most people use cell phones. We no longer have landlines. And so imagine we do not have to put up all the posts that would be required for landlines to function. We only need to have an internet connection to be able to communicate with one another. So we can leapfrog into the future with technology and bypass some of the infrastructure that we never had. So finally, I would say that we need to make disruption part of our brand, an actual part of our brand. We have seen how our ancestors disrupted. They disrupted systems of oppression, culture, and power to create survival, freedom, and identity. Now it's on us to disrupt markets, industries, and narratives to create prosperity. I close with this. Disruption is our inheritance, but it must also be our legacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaina, for an incredible presentation. Thank you so much to the rest of the panel. It gives us a lot to think about. But before we deep dive, I'm going to do something a little fun. I want you all to tell the audience and everyone watching around the world on CARIFESTAXV TV, who are you all wearing today? What? So tell me who, I'm going to start with Mika. Tell me about the dress.
Who unfortunately is not Caribbean.
That's fine. I'm not wearing Caribbean.
And the reason for that is because the Caribbean brand I usually wear is Bene Caribe. I want to give her a shout out,
Love
Abby Charles, right? So Abby, sorry, I'm not wearing you today because I've been wearing your stuff over and over and I just needed something new.
Yeah.
But this is by Alvin Adair.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Dion?
Okay, well, I'm wearing all Caribbean.
Period.
The dress is Crystal and Co. I actually got this at the Grand Market last night. The earrings are a Jamaican designer. I honestly can't remember her name. I also got this at the market. And my slippers, I also got at the market. um,
You wasn't playing games.
we're talking brand name.
Yeah, exactly.
The slippers, Ted Arthur from Tobago.
Renali.
Tennille, you put me on the
You,
spot.
no, well, you know,
Put
I'm
me on the
watching the
spot.
shoes, watching the shoes, and I'm trying to figure out the shoe in my size because I feel we might have a barter situation happening after the panel.
Unfortunately, I don't have anything Caribbean, but I made sure I brought statement pieces. My necklace is from Ecuador. They are from an
Wow.
artist from an Amazon, and cool story about it. I'm sure you can all see in the back. Um, the artists in Ecuador, they use the environment and the natural, the flowers and animals. So this is mimicking the coral snakes.
Oh,
So we
wow.
all see beading like this, but I've never been able to get the story behind it. When we buy, it's just not beautiful. We want to know more about it. So seeing the art, and then they had like snake bones, the spine of the snake, and they made necklaces, and this one caught my eye. So this is representing the snakes, the coral snakes
That is
in the
gorgeous.
jungle.
So my statement piece is this skirt here, and the designer is Haitian-Italian designer Stella Jean.
Wow. It's gorgeous. I want you all to close your eyes for a few seconds and think about the idea of a living brand. Um, what childhood story or memory from the Caribbean do you carry into every project, regardless of where in the world you are? Because we're all globetrotters. Regardless of where in the world you are, what is the one childhood story or Caribbean memory that you take as a thread for the work that you do with brand identities? Mika, I'll start with you. And you forgot to mention the fact that you're wearing Fenty Beauty, but I'm going to mention it because I'm wearing it too.
Okay, okay. And Fancy Beauty. Yeah, we could claim that as a Caribbean brand. Um, so for me, um, my I don't know if to just say childhood, but the memory was my father, Michael Cooper is his name. He left a very successful corporate career as an engineer in the Neil and Massey Group in Trinidad, and had the opportunity to continue ascending into that field. But instead, he chose to leave that career and start a steel pan manufacturing and exporting company called Panland. And that has had, only looking back and now looking at what I'm doing now with building Soleil Space, my media company, that example of entrepreneurship, but not just entrepreneurship, but taking the innovation of Trinidad and the Caribbean and turning it into true commercial success. And now Panland is the largest manufacturer of the steel pans in the world. And I continue to draw from him. So that's why I say I don't even know if it's a childhood thing. It's a living thing, right? It's a family thing. It's a legacy thing. But I think it's been an example that gave me the courage to pursue entrepreneurship and also leave my corporate career and take this leap.
Yeah, and I think it's about that. Give her a round of applause, and Mr. Cooper a round of applause. It's about taking risk, but also about taking ownership as well, right? And I know a lot of the work that Dion does with your Caribbean guide. It's also about taking ownership of telling our stories our ways. So I want you to share that one childhood memory that you might be thinking of that really it always reels you back in to the nucleus of it all.
Okay, at the risk of sounding cliche, I'm a bit of a history buff. So for me, I always remind myself that my ancestors survived the atrocities of the Middle Passage and plantation life. So I really like, how dare we not do everything within our power to live our best lives? We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. So we literally have a responsibility to live life to the fullest. In addition to that, my grandmother has always been, God rest her soul, has always been a source of inspiration for me because she was a woman ahead of her time. She had all these bold ideas for herself that she wasn't able to realize. So again, I take it as my responsibility to make sure that myself, well, it's harder for me to remind myself, but for my daughter, it's important for me to keep reminding her that no dream is too big for her to accomplish. So that's some of what's at the root of everything that I do.
Beautiful. Ronelli?
One of the core memories that I bring along with me in everything that I do is growing up. I grew up with an aunt. She's a survivor of polio, and in our tradition, our Spanish tradition, we're always told as women that we aren't supposed to go to school. It's not encouraged. So instead of that, you are taught to cook, you're taught to sew. And in my case, was taught to embroider. I hated embroidery because I'm left-handed and she was right-handed. So we would always clash when it comes to sewing off of patterns. And as much as I hated that, I really would sit back now that I'm older and I realized that I stand on the shoulders of these strong women, her, my grandmother, my mother. So in my work, I always keep on with that idea of what can I do with my business to empower others. Not sectioning out the guys, but for me, how can I, as a brand, as a creative, keep on doing projects that include women, not just for them to share their artistic abilities, but for financial independence.
China?
So I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs and community builders in Haiti. And what I remember fondly is my grandparents would, in our backyard, set up canvases and easels with paintbrushes. And they would invite young kids from the neighborhood to come and paint in that section of our little backyard. And every Saturday and Sunday afternoon, all these young people would be there just painting and just expressing themselves. And I would be there just painting too. So it was like a little club on the weekends. I didn't understand what it was that they were doing at the time. But out of these little activities, a lot of impressive artists emerged because they were freely given the tools to express themselves. And then ultimately, they went to art school and got to perfect their craft. And many years later, I understood that what they were actually doing was incubating talent. And so how that memory ties back to the work that I do, I work in the space of working with entrepreneurs, incubating talent, investing in entrepreneurs, investing in talent. And so I can see the direct linkage of the impact of that exposure that my grandparents created for me in supporting young talent and investing in them, and how that has translated in my own experience and the work that I do today.
You know, as a publicist, I think about the work, yes, please give her a round of applause. You know, as a publicist, I think of the work that all of us are doing. I recently concluded, you know, the Spice Mass press trip experience, which Dion has had the great fortune of being on, to tell Caribbean stories our way. And I think about the way that there's always the potentiality around the corner of losing the essence of that storytelling when the audience widens. So I think my follow-up question in that regard would be, how do we as a collective balance the bravado of global visibility with the intimacy of local roots, so that we ensure that our collective Caribbean brand doesn't lose its Caribbean soul or its Caribbeanness while reaching across borders? And I'm going to throw that straight to Ronelli.
I think it all comes back with knowing who you are. We're not able to tell a story or even half of it if we don't do our own research. Again, back to Belize, we're a very, very young country. We're having our independence next month.
Woohoo.
uh,
Yeah.
a very young country, and we come from a lot of different ethnicities. So when you ask about who are you, what's your ethnicity, we're able like to do that very quickly, which I see when I ask other bigger Caribbean countries, what's your ethnicity? They be like, I'm black, or I'm this, I'm not. I'm like, but where do you come from? So I was lucky to come from a small country where I'm able to trace back from where my great great grandfather came from, and I've able to done that research and then put that research into what now our creative groups, thanks to them, they're here today, are able to ex- open the dialogue of what it is to be Belizean. We don't want to hear stories, oh, because we come from Guatemala, we do this, or from Mexico when we do that. No, what are tradition in Belize? What is our Belizeanness? What makes us proud to wear that red, white, and blue? And using that narrative to use technology now. Because we can't keep on telling these stories just when we come together. We have to include the world using social media, using our art, and collaborating with other artisans, not just in your country. Social media has been able to make it so easy to connect with people from around the world with not even meeting. So, using technology and doing a lot of research and finding ways on how to use innovation to spark the interest of the youths. Because once we're not here, there's the one coming and they need to continue this legacy.
I think what Ronald is saying is important, and I really want Mika to jump in here with regards to that same question, because the work that you're doing with Soleil Space, I see that as a very important connective tissue to how we are able to kind of develop our identity.
Yeah, actually, when I conceptualized Soleil, and for just to kind of give the audience a background, Soleil Space is a tech media platform for independent film that brings together communities and filmmakers of the global South diasporas. So we're talking about Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Middle East, both in the West and in what I call the home countries, right? The goal of it is to solidify and create this cross-cultural hub of innovation that brings together creator economy, community, and streaming of independent films. Now, many times people ask me, well, I had an investor ask me this once, what gives you the authority to build a platform for all these cultures? And I actually said, I am Trinidadian. And that
Ding,
was,
ding, ding.
yeah, like he didn't understand what I meant by that. And I said, inherent in the Trinidadian identity is a connection to all these different cultures and an understanding of how what we have in common, right? And what makes us different. And we are a unique experiment of how these different cultures can interweave and live in peace. And so bringing that back to answer your question, um, that notion of owning what we are and then exporting it, sometimes we look at that as two steps or as two distinct concepts, but they're actually very intertwined. The more we own what we are, we have something that we could teach the world. And that inherently is a global contribution. That inherently will give us the global visibility that we want. And so I don't really see it as a trade off. I see it as a continuum. I see it as something that emanates from what Ronelli said, from the inside and goes out untouched, really. Yeah.
Let's talk about the narrative of aesthetics. Caribbean narratives, they carry this note of rhythm and resistance. And Dion, I want to talk to you about that translation into the visual and the sonic weight of those expectations. Being an award-winning journalist and an accomplished storyteller, how do we use our region's identity to translate into brand languages that connect with global audiences who may not share our history, because at the end of the day, not everybody has the privilege of saying, well, we're Trini, so we understand the interconnectedness. How do we work through that as opposed to around it?
I think we would strike the perfect balance if we center people instead of audiences. What I've found is that we too, in the Caribbean, and again, it goes back to not valuing ourselves enough, we tend to water down who we are. We tend to try to create our stories in such a way that it loses the essence of who we are because we're trying to appeal to mass audiences. But I think if we center the communities that we come from, we center people instead of just the product. And also delve a little deeper. Yes, we have steel pan. Yes, we have carnival. But we need to be a little bit more consistent in sharing the authentic stories behind these products, not just go and show the final product, but if we show the story, the struggle from which carnival and the steel pan and products like that come from, then people will have a deeper understanding and a better appreciation, I think, for who we are, where we come from, and what we're trying to share with the world.
And China, in tech, it's not only in fashion and in the arts where palettes of color and sound and textures are used. That's something that is fundamental to the art of technology, so to speak. What would you say is a strength in technology to lean into that helps us to connect the brand identities of the stories that we're able to tell, or to push back against stereotypes that may be carried with our Caribbeanness? Because everybody has an opinion on what it means to be Caribbean, right? What it means to be of us, of our heritage, of our identity. So I want to know, how do we smartly and collectively push back against that?
Wow, that's a very loaded question, Tennille.
I
I'm going to
know.
try to answer it from the way I understand it. I think technology as an enabler, as a tool, is extremely powerful in allowing our Caribbean brands to be experienced by people even without even coming to the Caribbean, right? If you think about tools like virtual reality, where you can create an entire world that mimics Trinidad, Tobago, that mimics Barbados, that mimics this experience of CARIFESTA, somebody in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Rwanda could potentially step into that virtual space and experience that without even leaving their home. And so technology would enable us to do a lot more, to take our products, to take our storytelling, to take our history, to take our culture and export it even further if we're able to tap into the power that it has. Another example of that is artificial intelligence, which is all the craze right now. Raise your hand if you use ChatGPT. What did we do before ChatGPT? I don't know. I ask myself, what did we do before cell phones, right? Today, no one can imagine what the world was like before cell phones. This is how we communicate with each other. This is how we do commerce. This is how we tell our stories. This is our brain in a small device, right? And so when you think about artificial intelligence being able to be this tool that harnesses information about who we are, we need to be careful about who is training that artificial intelligence. Does it know what we know? Does it encompass all of our history or just a part of our history? And the people who are searching for that information on ChatGPT, are they getting the full story? So we also have to understand that the people who are often creating those technology tools may not look like us. And so we do have to step into those spaces and make sure that we are present and represented as well.
I have a follow-up question for you. So what speculative or futuristic dreams are you kind of toying with to help, deepen your footprint as it relates to your brand identity?
My personal brand? Can I switch that over to the brand for Haiti?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay. Because for me, I deeply feel that Haiti is like this misunderstood Caribbean child. We have gone through so much in our history, and we are proud because of 1804. We're proud because of the slave revolution and the result of that. But we are not in a space right now where we can really own that pride, right? There's so much happening in Haiti right now that I cannot say that we're in a good place. So my dream is to contribute to making Haiti a destination for innovation. So all that Haiti has to offer, that it becomes known for space tech, sending rockets to space, that it becomes known for breakthrough emerging technologies, not for the problems that we're experiencing today. And a lot of that has to do with media. The media doesn't really help us in telling our story. And the few media that do exist locally are even more scarce globally. There's only maybe 2 Haitian American media platforms that we get our news from, and thousands of self-claimed journalists on YouTube who are sharing misinformation. So if you can imagine right now, we don't have a trained an environment that has trained storytellers that can help us position Haiti as what it could be. It doesn't position Haiti with the talent that exists in the environment. Those people hardly ever get talked about, right? And so for me, that dream is how can I contribute to shifting that narrative, not only in investing in the talent, but in also helping to tell the story of those talented people so that ultimately people get excited about Haiti as a destination for innovation.
And I want to, a round of applause because I really do want to acknowledge the power and purpose of Haiti. And I want to say categorically that none of the freedoms that we are able to enjoy and experience in the Caribbean region would be possible without the history and heritage that Haiti has contributed to the Caribbean landscape. So I just wanted to take a moment to really acknowledge and say that. Renali, I want you to tell me a bit about how can Caribbean creators harness technology, in your view, not just as a tool for visibility, but as a stage for world building, in imagining these vibrant and promising Caribbean futures?
I follow a brand, Bodo. They are from Ghana. And what I love about even all African brands is that they are doing exactly what you're just asking. Using technology to not just tell what Africa is about, but also making new and innovative stuff with it. New fabrics, using AI and these immersive experience to tell the story of Africa, not about these places that don't have food to eat or these, but what the richness of Africa has to offer. And I believe that if the Caribbean is able to do that, or even collaborate with Africa, because I believe that it's coming. It has
It's right
begun.
around the
It
corner.
has begun. If we're able to immerse ourselves in that or incubate ourselves in that, that we'd be able to use the innovation and technology to a better capacity. Not just music, not just food, not just fashion, but in a way that would just put the Caribbean on a pedestal and the people. And we retell that story and open a new dialogue.
I really love the fact that you drew on fashion and art because I am actually wearing a Nigerian designer today. Her name is Andrea Iyama, but it also reminds me she had to cross borders to get to an audience like me in the Caribbean to solidify this staunch following. And it takes me into my next line of questioning, which is it's really, really important that we acknowledge heritage and legacy because heritage can be quiet, but it can also be powerful. It's woven into fabrics, it's woven into gestures. We hear it in the dialect, and we see it in the ritualization of our identities that are economic drivers, that are socio political sites of expression. So, Dion, I want to talk to you about consciously embedding Caribbean legacy into your work so that it travels intact because fragmentation does not benefit us. How does it travel intact? And I'm also going to come to Mika with that question as well. How do we use our identity to travel intact so that we are able to meet the needs of the audiences that are not in our most immediate purview?
Okay, to begin with, we have to be fully aware of what and who our identity is. And what I've found in my travels around the Caribbean is that we don't have as many quote unquote woke people as we'd like to think. There are still very many people who only latch on to the facets of culture that benefit them in some way. And unfortunately, a lot of the times, these are the people that have the largest audiences. So they share only the snippets of our culture, the snippets of our history, as I mentioned, that is beneficial to them, and not the whole story. So they often lean into stereotypes. For me, how I embed heritage and legacy into everything that I do. When I had my daughter just under 10 years, almost 10 years ago, I got very intentional about things that I do, the way that I look. I had relaxed hair. And not too long after she was born, I did a big chop and I went natural because as she began to get more aware, I realized that she wouldn't know me with my hair as it naturally grows out of my head. She would just know me with this straight hair. And how can I expect to grow up a strong, confident black girl who was born in Trinidad and Tobago, now lives in St. Kitts? How do I expect her to have that innate confidence to show up as she is, boldly and unapologetically, if I am not presenting myself as myself? So that is where I really got intentional about everything like that. And then as she's a big reader as well, she has a lot of questions. So I found myself having to
Big
do.
reader. My girl is an author.
Yes, she is. So I had to dedicate a lot more time into making sure that I could answer the questions that she asked, making sure that even sometimes appearances that she would have, as you mentioned, she's an author, the clothes that she would wear, the clothes that I would wear. I remember not too long ago, I wear a lot of African inspired clothing, a lot of bright, bold prints. If you know me, you would know that. But we still have a lot of people who have issues with things like that. If I am invited to sit on a panel and I decide to wear one of my African prints, I have heard people, furthermore, people have walked up to me and asked, "Do you wear normal clothes? What is normal clothes?" I am so serious. People here in the Caribbean, people who look like me, would walk up to me and ask me, "Do you wear normal clothes?" You don't have small earrings. Yes, I do, but I prefer the big ones. I prefer
Next
the bright,
question.
right. I prefer clothing that speaks to who I am and bits of where I came from. So for me, that's just some of the little things that I incorporate into my day to day to pay homage to my ancestors and to ensure that, well, my daughter knows who she is and where she comes from.
I like that, Shina took the national perspective and you're taking a more micro perspective. I would love for Mika to answer that question, but I also want Shina to start thinking about our responsibilities as Caribbean creatives and how we help to shape not just the personal brand, but a collective brand Caribbean. So just, roll that around in your head for a bit while Mika answers the follow-up question that Dion just took on.
So the question was, how does heritage?
How do you consciously embed Caribbean legacy into your work so that it travels intact beyond our borders?
So getting a little bit techie practical, right? If you were to go onto our platform, we actually curate the films by region. The goal was to allow the audience to discover films from different parts of the world and immerse yourself into the different film worlds of the global South diasporas. So we divided that world of solar space into 7 regions: North America, Latin America, Asia, Africa, and I put the Caribbean deliberately as a distinct region within that. And the reason, thanks, the reason for that was, because the Caribbean is usually lumped into Latin
LATAM.
America, or is lumped in from the US perspective into multicultural or black, when the Caribbean is not any of those things. It may touch those things, but it's not those things. And so there was a very deliberate and conscious decision to do that, both from the audience side, but also from the filmmaker perspective, creating a pipeline for Caribbean filmmakers to fill that space, right? The other thing that is really important is always having Caribbean people on my team. And the teams, because as we grow, there'll be teams. And the reason for that is that as a Trinidadian who went to the US to go to college and the UK, etc., I came to realize that we have a very unique ability to communicate with people from different cultures and grasp those concepts very, very quickly and easily and seamlessly. And it's a skill set that I don't think we realize we have, and that translates very well into business acumen, into the ability to operate, right? So those two things I'll say in our work, I try to embed and preserve that in anything that we do.
I really commend your preservationist approach to the way that you package our Caribbeanness in the most responsible way that you know how to do. You're welcome. So I'm swinging back to you, Shaina. Yes, give her a round of applause because they're doing the work. They're not just, talking the talk, they're walking the walk as well. So Shaina, I'm going to swing back to you. Just a refresher for the question that I had to throw your way. What responsibilities do Caribbean creatives have in shaping not just their own singular individual personal brand, but a collective brand Caribbean for the world's consumption? Respectful consumption, I should say, because we have seen some things.
That is another very heavy question to Neil. This is philosophical.
China, great responsibility. You know how that saying goes.
So when I think about the Caribbean brand, the region as a brand, it's very hard to think about the region as a brand. And I'm looking at examples of other regions like Europe or Asia, and regions that have multiple countries, and each of those countries have a distinct identity. So when you think about France versus Spain versus Germany, each of those countries are known for something specific. Even in Asia, if you think about China versus Singapore, they have very distinctive identities, even though they are part of a region with collective countries. Even in the United States, when you think about Washington, D.C., where I live, which is the seat of power and government affairs, versus California, specifically Los Angeles, which is known for Hollywood and filmmaking, or New York, which is known for finance and fashion. A lot of these places have distinct identities. So can I say that the United States has a collective identity? Yes, as a country. But even within that, there's multiple micro-identities in each of the 50 states. Can I say that Europe has a collective identity? Sort of. Sort of.
Kind of.
We know that there's a thing called European summer. So no matter what country you go to, there's a European summer in Italy, European summer in Spain. No matter what, you're going to have a great European summer. So in thinking about that, what makes that collective identity, what are the ingredients that are making that collective identity? If I say European summer, it's the countryside, it's softness, it's relaxation, it's this joie de vivre. So if I put these elements in the context of the Caribbean, Trinidad is very different from Jamaica, very different from Belize, very different from Haiti. But what makes Caribbean identity unified? Beyond the sun, sand, and sea that we've been talking about. And I think it really goes back to history. It's not something that is often touched about when we talk about the Caribbean brand, but our history is very deep, and it has given birth to all the cultures that we see. Without history, we would not have Caribbean. It would have been Arawak, Taino, Caribs, and their history. But because of the slave trade and the things that have happened from that space beyond, it has given birth to all types of subcultures that make up the Caribbean. So how do we leverage and tap into that history to build that Caribbean brand and show that we're not a monolith? There's not, the Trinidad Carnival does not look like the Haitian Carnival. It's still Carnival, right? So for a creator, how do you leverage your own brand and then by way of that project a Caribbean brand? That's very challenging. I can't even think about if I were an artist, what would I do? But I would start with history, right? My own history, and that how does my own history touch into the regional history? And how can I tell the story of where I come from in terms of my country, in terms of my city, and then tie that into a regional story and how what I do and where I come from has informed how I show up in the world.
Dion, you're looking like you have something to say there to add, I know you. I know you're good.
Well, I know what I'm listening to Shaina speak. How do we leverage? We leverage, I think, by not denying the uncomfortable parts of our history. And I think that's something that we do regardless of if we're from Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, Belize. I think we do that too often. We tend to latch on to the parts of the story that are palatable, that are easy to digest, the parts of our history that won't offend. But we are too caught up in, again, centering audiences instead of centering people, centering our own communities. And once we stop, we refocus, we shift our focus to us, I think we would be in a better position to do all that you spoke about.
I'm going to invite the opportunity for anyone from the audience who may have a question or a contribution or a statement, to gather around and really, really think about the discussion that we're having. Very important dialogue. And while that is happening, I want to ask each of the members of the panel if they can collaborate with one artist, brand, or cultural institution outside of the Caribbean to amplify your vision on what you are currently doing. Who or what would that be and why? I want the audience to start thinking about that question too, because I think that's really, really important in the way that we look at different intersectionalities. We all have different lived experiences, so please don't feel shy or afraid to come forward and give your contribution. But I think it's really, really important to hear from you guys as well. So, Mika, we'll start with you. Just one.
One. That's the hard part.
I have to give you the Jeopardy countdown.
Um, the first person that just came to mind is Idris Elba. And a lot of people think of Idris Elba as like, oh, he's so fine, But he's actually doing a lot of work. He just founded a production studio in Ghana. So you guys know he's British and he also has African background. That is not Ghanaian, but he's actually started this production studio in Ghana. And Idris has a very diasporic lens to everything that he does. And of course, he's accomplished a lot in the Hollywood space, right? Very traditional Hollywood. But he's now leveraging that impact and investing in the diaspora, but rooting it in Ghana. And I think Ghana is also doing a lot of great things. So I feel like that trifecta of Idris, Ghana, and Soleil Space could be very powerful.
Dion, that's actually a really good one. And it just makes me think of the fact that even Barbados is hosting the Gooba Awards, which is a Ghana organization. They're crossing waters to host their annual awards in Barbados in November.
Oh,
So
I need to come to that.
Yes, you definitely. So you definitely need to come back to Barbados for that. And it's that transatlantic approach to the work that we're doing. That we're not doing the work by ourselves, And I think people need to remember that we have a lot of work to do, but there are people outside of the Caribbean that are also rooting for us. So I want you to remember that as well.
I'll just quickly say this is the era now for South to South collaboration. We used to be South to get to the North, and we needed the North and the dependencies, but the South to South is where the power is going to lie going forward.
I'm going to put that on a T-shirt. Dion.
For me, I would love to collaborate with children's book authors here in the Caribbean. I think while we have a lot more options for literature for our younger members of society, I think what we need more of is more cohesion and more unity within that space. And I think also we need a lot more immersive experiences. So beyond seeing themselves represented on the pages, they could have more in-depth experiences about the stories of little boys and girls that come from different parts of the Caribbean. I really wish that we could create a platform that would make it so much easier for authors in Trinidad or children in Trinidad to be able to access books that they could learn about different facets of culture from different parts of the Caribbean. Instead of, I mean, in Trinidad, we have stores like Paper-Based Bookshop, but I think we need more boutique bookshops like that that focus primarily on curating a list of books written by us for us. So that is a big dream of mine, and hopefully it will happen soon.
Collaboration outside of the Caribbean.
Yes, outside of the Caribbean.
I would have to say Carolina Herrera. I love Carolina Herrera because, especially now, because they're going back to the roots of what Mexican culture is, the indigenous culture and their tradition and especially their techniques. Right now, they're doing a series of artists that do embroidery work. Besides doing bridal, I do embroidery work, and I love seeing how they're able to not just do couture, but also say the stories and of the people that make them. That's one thing that I love. That as big as what the Carolina Herrera brand is, they're still able to bring that back to what the root of that traditional practice that they do. You meet the women at their houses and you see how they make it and they tell their story, but most importantly, how does working with Carolina Herrera meant to them and how it has changed their lives, but not how the brand is changing them. If I was to collaborate, I would definitely pick them.
I think that's really important because I always tell people that we were doing couture in the Caribbean before couture knew itself to be couture. We were the ones for Innocence Day going to our tailors and seamstresses and getting our dresses made for church for Innocence Day. We were the ones that are going to the seamstresses in our local communities to make sure that we have clothes to go to heritage festivals in Tobago and going to festivals in
Graduation and
Antigua,
confirmation.
graduations, confirmations. We were doing couture and sustainable fashion long before the world really, really caught on, and that is the nexus of identity packaging that we have to look at when we're talking about glow ups and branding beyond borders, because it's not to say that the products do not exist. We just haven't packaged it for other persons outside of the Caribbean to be aware that our Caribbeanness was always the global standard. So I would like to, pass the question on to Shaina.
Yes.
And also waiting, in the event where anyone from the audience would like to pose a question or has a recommendation for the panel or a question for a specific member of the panel, now is the time. We are more than happy to facilitate. Shaina?
Yes, so I'm going to be the disruptor and answer with 2 countries and 1 institution. So I would collaborate with Estonia and Singapore. Estonia and Singapore were both very small countries that started out as impoverished. Estonia is Eastern European, extremely tiny, battling with Russia for a very long time to have its own identity. Singapore also colonized space and basically had to recreate themselves from scratch after years of just being impoverished to remain politically correct. Those 2 places have now become destinations for innovation. When you think about Singapore, it is the destination for innovation in Europe. You can set up an e-residency in Estonia within 24 hours. So if you wanted to become an e-resident of Estonia and set up a business, you can do it within 24 hours from right here in Barbados. Just go online and register and become a citizen. That's powerful. There are a lot of people who cannot even register themselves as a citizen in the country the manual way, being present. Singapore went from being impoverished to now leading in all things technology in the Asian region. So I would want that same sort of collaboration with what they've done in the 10, 20 years that it took them to get there, to collaborate with us to be able to do the same thing. And if we can turn things around in 10 or 20 years for the Caribbean region to go from being known as impoverished or experiencing poverty to being known as a destination for innovation, that would be powerful. It's possible. These two countries are examples of that. And Rwanda is actually following the blueprint from those countries. Now, the institution that I would collaborate with is NASA. I know, heads are turning. NASA, because when you think of the Caribbean, you don't think about space technology. You don't think about space at all, right? At all. But how amazing would it be if we were sending rockets from Haiti, from Trinidad, from Barbados, sending Caribbean people into space? That's the first thing. How amazing would it be if we were mining minerals from space the way that other major countries are doing, because that is what is going into the technologies that we use, right? So how amazing would it be that we ourselves became a destination for breakthrough space technology? Not just consumers of it or waiting for it to happen to us, but being amongst the leaders for it. So if we could collaborate with NASA to make that happen, I think that would be pretty cool.
We'd also send rotis into space, by the way. Like, we have to send rotis.
We have to send rotis and fried plantains to space.
Oh my God, plantain, yes. That's fabulous. No, that, you know, there's so much room for growth and opportunity that I think we forget to explore because we are just so hyper-focused on what is in front of us. And platforms like CARIFESTAXV and the Big Conversation series. And I really have to shout out Dr. Barrow for really championing the cause of this platform. It helps us to kind of see outside of ourselves. You know, we're all doing good work, but it's always better when we're kind of doing it together and we're able to collaborate and cohere and think out, not only outside of the box, but outside of the limits of our lived experiences, because there will always naturally be limitations. And I think that we break cycles when it is that we're able to explore beyond borders, not only geographically, but also in our minds as well. So my last question for the panel, and I'm going to start with Mika. Think about 10-year-old Mika and 10-year-old Dion and 10-year-old Renali and 10-year-old Shaina as a young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed creative, whatever that definition of creativity means for you, because it's unique, who wants to glow up, might be seeing their favorite actor or actress or painter or writer doing their thing. What is one piece of practical advice that you would give to 10-year-old Mika tomorrow to start building their borderless brand? Because you're doing it right now, you know. You're already doing it. But what would you tell 10-year-old Mika?
I would tell her that her dreams aren't too big. I've always had very big dreams to the point where it will consume me, and I would feel like I couldn't talk to many people about it because I could talk to my father because he always had big dreams too. But, you know, just outside of the family, you know, putting those things out there, I would tell her that the dreams aren't too big. They aren't too big for Trinidad. They're not too big for your station in life economically. They're not too big for the single mother household. They're not too big for any of that. And I will also tell her to get started. Start making work, start putting things out there on paper, or create whatever it is that's in your mind. Start from now. You're not too young to do it. And I think this generation has the platforms that we didn't have to be able to put their work out and be able to galvanize audiences. The last thing quickly I'll say is to protect what you do put out. Find a little, even if it's your little 10-year-old version of a little logo, make your little mark on whatever you do so that you have that's you developing your IP from a very young age.
10-year-old Dion.
Given the opportunity to speak to my 10-year-old self, I would say use your voice. I would also say don't be afraid to create. I would say to 10-year-old Dion, your voice matters. And just to piggyback off what Mika said, where you start is not where you will ultimately end. You could use the challenges that you're facing now to be the launch pad for where you want to be tomorrow.
10-year-old Ronelli.
Okay, growing up, I was super creative to the point where I feel like I was misunderstood. And because of the many responsibilities given to me from a very young child, because I was a companion to my disabled aunt, I felt like I grew up too fast and I was very creative too. So that was my only outlet to the point where at many times I was misunderstood amongst my peers. But I would tell my 10-year-old self to just keep on creating and learning and embracing all of that new tradition and old tradition, and that you'll find your tribe along the way. You'll find people that will understand you and fill your cup, which today I'm very happy to say that I have found my tribe, and I keep on finding my tribe.
So I believe strongly in documenting and archiving as a way of preserving our memory. And I know that I started journaling and keeping a diary since the age of 10. And so I would tell my 10-year-old self to start writing a diary as soon as you feel comfortable putting your story on paper. Because now I have multiple books that share the story of my life, who I was, the decisions I made, how I was thinking about it. I can go back to a page when I was in elementary school and my uniform ripped and Sophie helped me and how grateful I was, and the kind of mindset I had back then. And I can reference that with the kind of mindset that I have today and how that's evolved and how I've changed. And to be able to look at that, nobody is keeping track of my life. There's no movie on my life. So the only way to keep track of those things, the only way to learn from how I'm evolving as a person is for myself to document it. Today we use our cell phones to take selfies, to take videos. We put our stories on social media, but perhaps in a slightly superficial way. So what I would tell my 10-year-old self is to intentionally document every little thing, even if it's just today I went to the library and I sat there and I read one book. And to be able to go back and say, wow, I enjoyed going to the library and reading books back when I was 10 is something no one else can give to you. You can only give to yourself.
That's beautiful. And as we close today's panel session, I want us to really pause, applause, and acknowledge what we've been able to build in conversation today. But before we end, I know that there's one question.
Yeah. I welcome your panel discussion. It's very informative. But I believe that we've thrown the bathwater out of the bathtub long ago. The Caribbean should be one nation. I'm not going to get back there. I'm sorry about that. They should have had a federation, and it should be one nation because they're able to cultivate all the things that you've spoken about here this evening, what you've done, what you've said, in one power. And what has happened is that if the world situation don't have a large world power, they're not going to be heard. And the Caribbean had a very good opportunity to use that. and they'll be here to have all these kind of different activities and diversities in their own countries, and I think that will be reckoned. We have things in this country and St. Lucia and all the, and we reckon, and we have been a first-class nation, but we have let certain elements. You see, everybody wanted a nation for themselves, and sometimes they can't get through to it. But I believe that one Caribbean nation would have been great. I say it. The Caribbean is one of the greatest countries, the greatest country in the world. But I can't speak for one Caribbean nation, and that is the story. I thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your contribution. I want to piggyback off of something that he said in thinking about aptitude versus attitude. He's championing for one Caribbean nation, but what is preventing us, even in the event where we're not able to create one federation? What is the wall that is preventing us from taking a more unified approach to our Caribbean identity, do you think? And I'll start with Mika. It could be one word.
I think the focus of our resources. We don't focus our resources into investing in that concept, right? Whether it is the ability to go from Trinidad to Barbados cheaper than you'll go to Miami, right? The infrastructure investment.
That's a really, really good point, Dion.
I think competition. I think we have a lot of infighting, and that is stemming our progress a lot.
Ronali?
I would say changing the way we do politics. Right now, we're mimicking a lot of what we see out there of, colonial ideologies. But if we're able to do what Barbados is doing, what other small Caribbean nations are doing, I think together, collectively, I think a lot of things would change for the Caribbean just by changing our political ideologies.
And it really warmed my heart to hear Prime Minister Motley announce earlier this week the purchasing of the Banyan archives from Trinidad and Tobago. That is a game-changing move that will strengthen our Caribbean resolve. And it's also a very, very important tourism indicator, believe it or not, because when historians need to do the research, they will come to us. We don't have to go to them anymore. And Barbados being at the center of that driver, of that economic and socio-political driver, I think it's really, really going to be a story that we are able to tell 50 plus years from now. China, what is preventing us from moving towards that unification or that utilitarian approach to our Caribbean regional identity?
I would say governance. I think it is a beautiful thing for us to retain our individual Caribbean country identity because we are not a monolith, just like Africa is not a monolith. And even before colonial powers divided the continent into 54 countries, there were tribes that were very different in each region. You had the Dahomey, you had the Susu. There's just so many different microcosms of people and ecosystems that we cannot just assume that we all want to be one thing because we have different ideas, we have different ways of seeing things. Even in Christianity, we have all types of denominations. So religion itself, we see that people think differently and it should be okay to think differently. However, as a region, thinking about socio-political and economic power, I think governance is where we are really blocked because we don't do governance well for ourselves as countries, and then we don't do governance well as collaborators in a region, right? And maybe it's ego, maybe it's knowledge and know-how, and there's a gap there. But I would say that governance is probably the key piece that is preventing us from being able to act collectively as a region.
Yeah, and governance is a direct shaper of policy. So, and that's another conversation, hopefully in another panel that we have at the next CARIFESTA iteration. But for right now, as we close, we started with the idea of glow up, and it wasn't just about the glitter of personal success, but it was the deeper radiance that comes when Caribbean creativity travels, speaks, and reshapes the world beyond our borders. And I think what we've witnessed today is exactly that. Four incredible voices and visions stepping boldly into the light, carrying both memory and possibility. And I think our panelists today have reminded us that a brand is not just a logo or campaign, it's also a living archive. And I wish that the previous screen was up from the last presentation, because the three words in yellow, there was disruption, there was identity, and there was legacy. And I think those are three very, very important markers, because that is the story that sits in the rhythm of a drum line, or in the cut of a garment, or in the song of patois that Renali spoke about earlier, in the speculative dream of a Caribbean built technology. It is bravado and quiet power all at once. And to our panelists, I want to say thank you so much on behalf of the audience, because you have truly shown us how identity can move from the intimate to the international without losing its soul. And I think each of you in your way, and I really mean this, you have revealed to us how Caribbean people do not simply participate in global culture, but we author it. We have to author it, we have to remix it, we have to brand it with our own palette of our own rhythms, of our own colors, our own textures, and our own defiance. And on behalf of the panelists, I want to say to the audience, thank you so much, because you have also shown us here in this room and in tuning in from the digital landscape on CARIFESTAXV TV that our words, our songs, our presence, it's a reminder that the Caribbean brand doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to all of us. It's one industry, and it may be a variety of islands, but it's collective, and it is a chorus, and it's a constellation. And I want to leave everyone today with the words from Derek Walcott. And he said to us that breaking a vase reveals the love that resembles the fragments, and that is stronger than the love which took its symmetry for granted. And I'll repeat that for you. Break a vase, and the love that reassembles the fragments is stronger than that love which took its symmetry for granted. And I say that to you because the Caribbean has taken its fragments, its histories, its heritage, its migrations, its struggles, and we've reassembled them into something stronger, more radiant, more uncontainable. Nobody can contain us. And that is the radiance that we as a region carry. And as we leave this venue today, I want to invite you to carry one question from you and from us and to you. How will I glow up the Caribbean story in the spaces I move through tomorrow? Because the glow up is not just about being seen, it's also about us being remembered. And it's also about us being felt. It's also about being impossible to erase. And the Caribbean is not just a region, it's a vision, it's a songscape, it's a landscape, it's a future in motion. And this evening, I really want us to affirm, because I'm big on affirmations, affirm that our glow is not confined by borders. Affirm that it is borderless, timeless, and unstoppable. And with that, I say thank you so very much for joining us for this panel discussion on Glow Up Branding Beyond Borders, here from CARIFESTAXV 15 with the Big Conversation series. Thank you so very much.